This week, President Obama took a historic step forward on the issue of the rights of former prisoners when it comes to seeking a job. And here to discuss that topic with us now is Michele Jawando. She is the Vice President for Legal Progress at the Center for American Progress. She is the former General Counsel and Senior Advisor to Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, and she joins us now. Michele, thanks so much for coming on the program.
Thanks so much for having me.
You bet. The topic is called Ban the Box. Can you tell us a little bit about what that means?
Definitely. So, this week we were really excited to see something that here at CAP we have promoted, which is, when you think about it holistically, it's like, how do you focus on reintegrating formerly incarcerated individuals back into their community? So you've paid your debt to society. How do we both rehabilitate and reintegrate you back into the community? And so one of the things that the president did is he banned the box in federal employment. So what Ban the Box basically says is, if you are going through the hiring process, right now only limited to federal employment, so looking at the agencies, but the federal government is a huge employer. If you were going through the hiring process, on the initial application, there will no longer be this box, do you have a criminal record? And the reason why that's important is if you can kind of, on the merit of who you are, be looked at and judged and kind of make it through the hiring process. And then at the back end, if there are questions about inquiries into your criminal history, that question happens after someone decides whether or not you're the right person. And that's incredibly important, because what that does is ensures that applicants from all over the society, including those with prior criminal histories, which are our neighbors and our brothers and our sisters and our fathers and our mothers, 100 million Americans, that they receive a fair opportunity to compete for federal employment.
Well, it seems to make so much sense, the idea that people at least get a fair shot to make a good impression. It seems in every way reasonable and logical. Michele, have there been any studies on how the hiring statistics change if you do in fact ban the box? Because I think some states and other jurisdictions have done variations on this idea. Have there been studies that show that ex-prisoners, for example, or people with criminal records can in fact prevail in situations like that?
Yes, and in fact, one of the things that we have seen is disproportionately those formerly incarcerated individuals, when you have access to employment, we see dramatically cut rates on recidivism. The reason why there are major obstacles to successful reentry is that many times those formerly incarcerated individuals are rearrested, oftentimes within 3 years of release. And if you ask and you look at the research, often it's for what are called crimes of survival, right? So it's stealing food, or it is theft. It are things that happen because you don't have access to employment or questions about housing. And so something that was also happened this week is the president did a lot to relax the rules and send out guidance for public housing and HUD-assisted housing. And that's incredibly important, because if we send you out after you, again, have paid your debt to society, and often we're talking about low-level, non-violent offenders coming home to their communities, what's the first thing you need to find? You need to find a job to take care of yourself and potentially your family, and you also need to find a place to live. And so we're so excited that the president was able to kind of release new guidance on housing, and then also move forward on this banning the box.
See, here's one of the things I find interesting about it. We're talking with, and of course important, we're talking with Michele Jawando of the Center for American Progress. And that is this. It seems that not so long ago, this was a politically untouchable issue, that no mainstream politician wanted to go on record as standing up for the rights of people with a criminal record. And somehow the president has shown leadership on this issue. Does that strike you as a major shift in our politics?
It has struck me initially, but I think when you look at where we are, the direction we were moving was incredibly untenable, both for the economics, the fact that we are spending so much on our dollars, our taxpayer dollars, on a system that is broken. If you and I were spending our money on something over and over that was broken and had a horrible rate of return, we would not invest into that system. We would look for new ways to innovate. And I think that's where we are today. And the fact of the matter is we know some things that are tried and true that make a difference. So we know investing in adult reentry education makes a difference, because when you give people high quality kind of new skills in the educational sector, they can then compete and find suitable jobs and employment. When you think about housing, that makes a difference. And what I think is so important about this moment is we're again recognizing the very humanity of our brothers and sisters, of our neighbors. And the fact that we for so long discarded people and just kind of put them through this kind of system of mass incarceration and forgot that they were people that perhaps made a mistake that you and I may have made, but didn't get caught up in the system. It's important to recognize the humanity of others, and I think that that's starting to happen again today.
Well, and I think that is a very powerful part of this story. Now, let's talk for a second about who is affected by the president's order, and then we can talk about, the potential ripple effect and so on, but and encouraging others to do the same. But who will directly be affected by the president's action?
So there are about 600,000 returning citizens, formerly incarcerated individuals, who return home every year. And so what will happen now is those individuals, the president has called on Congress to do more, and there are many businesses that have already moved forward on Ban the Box, some as notable as Koch Industries that have already removed the box from job applications. But what will then happen is you will see kind of an uptick, I think, in applications for people who will go apply for federal employment. You will also see a major difference in housing. Again, because of the guidance for public housing authorities to look at who can live in HUD-assisted housing or HUD housing, and that's a huge, huge change. The fact of the matter is we know that having a criminal record for so many is both a cause and a consequence of poverty. And we're now looking at things holistically. We have a lot of work to do because this is a system that we have had in place, bad public policy crafted around fear and division for the last 40 years. And so it's going to take a lot more than just what the president announced this week, but it is a great step forward.
Now, the way we handle people who come out of prison in this country, or the way we have handled them, which this is the first step on a national level to reversing, it's really, it sets up kind of feedback loop, doesn't it? Where people who are in poverty, dragged into the mass incarceration system or fall into it for one reason or another. And then when they come out, the poverty dimension of it is amplified by their having been in prison, or people who are members of a minority group that is disproportionately targeted by law enforcement. Again, the economic and other biases are amplified by this process. So is this a way to kind of break the feedback loop?
Exactly. I think we underappreciate how mass incarceration and criminal records are unappreciated drivers of poverty and inequality. Whether you're talking about employment, barriers to employment, housing, public assistance, education, training, building good credit, these are all the basics that one needs to kind of reintegrate into society. And we have had faulty public policy that literally set up roadblocks everywhere an individual will turn. Whether it's looking at the issue around child support. In many states, you had child support that would build up while someone was incarcerated, sometimes for a low-level, nonviolent offense. And then when they came out, could be subject to, again, incarceration because they couldn't pay, but they were incarcerated. Right? So we're looking at how do we set up public policy that works? And at the end of the day, what keeps our community safer? Doesn't it make sense when we have people who are working, engaged in their communities, reunited with their family, having a place to find dignity in both work and housing and home? And that's what so many of these policies are. And, I think when we think about these things holistically and think about what does someone need to continue to contribute, what does someone need for their family, what does a community need, when we think about this holistically, I think we come out with better policy outcomes.
And I think when we talk about looking at it holistically, we also have to, as you keep emphasizing, accept the people who are affected by this as you mentioned, members of our community, members of our family, and so on, not treat them as the other. And I guess in terms of the politics of this, again, I think there's been a rare kind of bipartisan coalition coming together on this issue. You mentioned the Koch brothers and what they're doing in their companies. I believe they've been on the right side of this issue, along with a number of progressive activists in your own group and you folks at the Center for American Progress. So I guess my question for you would be, does this idea have opponents, or is it something that can gain momentum? Is there an opposition to overcome, or is it on its way?
So I would say thank you so much for this question, because we definitely have opponents. Why? Because we have lived and operated in fear for our public policy for years and years. We have people who, quite frankly, are afraid of change. They are afraid of saying, I made a mistake, that this policies that we put forward in terms of incarceration, mass incarceration, prison and sentencing reform isn't working. And they are afraid to say that. But we do have a great kind of bipartisan coalition, but it is hard to get rid of bad habits. And quite frankly, as a former Senate staffer, senior Senate staffer, I saw a lot of really bad policy made for no reason other than stubbornness and fear. And so we have quite a lot of work to do. I was so encouraged to see a great bipartisan bill introduced and pass out of the Senate Judiciary Committee. But the hardest fight before us is before the Senate floor. We also are waiting to see as things develop on the House side of the Capitol. So there's still a lot of work left. And a lot of those policies that are moving through the system now have to do with sentencing and prison reform, and a lot less on these measures that we're talking about today on reintegration. And we haven't even scratched the surface on how we help young people who are in the juvenile justice system. So there's a lot of work to do, and there are a lot of people who have benefited from this broken system for years and years, and they aren't as open to change. But I think at the end of the day, logic will prevail. I think we now have a coalition that recognizes that it's unaffordable. We cannot sustain this path that we've been on. And not only that, it is immoral what we've continued to do, and it's time for a change.
Well, I certainly appreciate you saying that. I certainly hope and believe that logic and humanity will prevail in this one. And I hope you'll come back and talk to us again about a number of topics related to this subject, because there's so many. Michele Jawando of the Center for American Progress, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, and you take care.